Suppose your research question is, how do nurse managers cope with severe staff shortages? What sampling technique would you use? Now, let me give you a clue. You want to ask yourself this question: who can answer my question? Now, if you said nurse managers, then you are right. If you said a matron, that is obsolete, you are right. If you said an in charge, you are also right. Now, why not newly employed nurses? The answer is simple. It is because newly employed nurses have never managed a ward. They have never supervised a ward. It's not that they are not important. They are important. But the research question does not need newly employed nurses. It needs nurse managers to answer the questions. Notice something. You are choosing ward managers intentionally. You are choosing them on purpose to participate in your study. That's why we call it a purposive sampling. Now, for the rest of this video, we are going to talk about when purposive sampling is the right choice. We are also going to talk about its types, how many participants you need when using this kind of sampling technique, and how to write it in your methods. Now, before we talk about when you should use a purposive sampling, let's talk about the biggest myth about this kind of sampling technique, because most of them think since it's purposive sampling, it means that I can interview whoever I want. That is not how purposive sampling works. It is not about choosing your favorite participant. It's about following clear rules. Think about it like applying for a job. If a hospital wants to employ nurses, do they employ someone who just walks through their gate? No. Do they employ someone who is not a nurse but maybe has another qualification? The answer is still no. That job must have a certain requirement or eligibility that you must have met in order for them to employ you. So, for example, maybe you need a nursing license, maybe you need a BSc certificate or a basic nursing certificate, and also maybe you must have done your internship and served. So that's how purposive sampling works. Before you begin, you want to spell out all your eligibility criteria, your inclusion and exclusion criteria. For example, maybe you want to say that I want to include only nurse managers because they are the one in charge of roster. They are the ones that deals with the staff shortages most of the time. And then secondly, maybe you want to say that that nurse must be working in a tertiary hospital. And the third one is maybe you can add that that nurse must have been in that position for maybe 5 years or even more than that. You have to spell out your inclusion criteria before you go ahead to start interviewing. Let's talk about when you should actually use purposive sampling. When is it the right sampling technique for your study? Now, for example, let's say you want to study the experiences of people who have survived stroke. So would you just walk into a hospital and start interviewing patients? The answer is no. You need people who have lived that experience. So you need to find people who have survived stroke, not just any patient that is admitted in a hospital. Another example is, suppose you are studying how oncology nurses cope with compassion fatigue. Would you just walk into a hospital and interview nurses from different departments or from any department? The answer is no. You need to go to oncology units because those nurses are the ones that have specific knowledge and have lived the experience. They know what a compassion fatigue is and they felt it. So you need to go to oncology ward or oncology unit to interview those kind of nurses. Or suppose you are studying why some hospitals have almost zero medication error despite the workload in that hospital. So you don't just interview any nurse from any hospital. You identify those specific hospitals with those unusual cases or scenarios and interview them. You are doing everything on purpose because you always want to start with one question: who have the experience that I need to report in my study? Now let's talk about the types of purposive sampling. There are many types, but we're going to talk about only 3 in this video because they are the most common ones. Now, the first type is the homogeneous sampling technique. Now, as the word implies, homogeneous meaning similar. Here, you want to recruit people who have similar characteristics and study them in depth. For example, suppose you want to study the experience of female oncology nurses in a tertiary hospital. Now, in your study, you don't recruit pediatric nurses. You don't recruit nurses from surgical or medical ward. You don't recruit doctors. You don't recruit pharmacists. You stick to nurses who are female and works in oncology units simply because they share similar characteristics. They belong to one group. Now, that is what we call a homogeneous sampling. Now, the second type of sampling that we want to talk about is the maximum variation sampling. Now, this is the opposite of the homogeneous type of sampling. I don't know why they don't call it heterogeneous, but you can use this to remember it. Now, in this type of sampling technique, you want to recruit people across different groups. with similar experiences. The reason is because you want to see whether the same idea appear across different settings. Now, for example, you want to study how nurse managers cope with understaffing. Now, in this case, you want to recruit maybe one nurse from a private hospital, one nurse from a tertiary hospital, one nurse from a state-level hospital or a general hospital, one from a rural primary health care center. And you can see that their workplaces are completely different. But suppose they describe the same challenges or similar challenges, that would make your findings even much more stronger. The next sampling type is what we call the extreme case sampling. Now, this is where you don't want the average case or you don't want the usual case. You want to go for something that is not common, something that is unusual. So, for example, imagine a hospital that is severely understaffed, yet they don't have any medication error. No single medication error has been recorded. That is unusual. So you might want to study that hospital to find out what is happening. Or a hospital with plenty of staff, yet they record medication errors almost every day. That is unusual as well. That is extreme. So it's something that you might want to study to find out what is happening, because you are not really interested in the usual case or in the average cases. Now let's talk about how many participants you need to include in your study. Is it 10, is it 20, or 50? Now actually, there is no mathematical formula for this. Like in quantitative research, mostly we use purposive sampling for qualitative research method. There is no mathematical formula. Like I said, you continue to interview your participants until you reach what we call data saturation. Now let me explain what data saturation is. Imagine you'll be interviewing your participants, you reach the 10th participant, and then you now interview the 11th participant, and then what the 11th participant told you from the interview is similar or is the same to what the 10th person told you. You interview the 12th participants, the same thing, the 13th, the same thing. There is no new information. Everything now sounds the same. Everyone is sounding similar. That is what we call data saturation. So this is when you stop interviewing your participants because you have attained data saturation. I want you to notice something. You are not stopping because you've reached a magic number. You are stopping because you are no longer learning anything new from the participants. Now, the next question is, when should you use a purposive sampling? Now, you want to ask yourself these three questions. The first one is, do you want to learn about people's experiences, their opinions, or the way they feel? If the answer is yes, then you can go with purposive sampling. The second question is, do I need people with a specific knowledge or a specific experience? If the answer is yes, you can go with purposive sampling as well. Now, the next question is, have you clearly written your inclusion and exclusion criteria? If the answer is no, you actually need to slow down and define the eligibility criteria. I know that every study has inclusion and exclusion criteria, which is why it is also important in this type of study, because you are collecting interviews on purpose. You are choosing participants on purpose. So your inclusion and exclusion criteria should be clearly defined. Now, let's talk about how you can actually write this kind of sampling in your methodology, because you don't just want to be writing purposive sampling was used. If you stop there, you are going to receive a lot of questions from a reviewer. You want to say to why you use that kind of sampling technique. Now, on your screen, you can see a paragraph that you can modify and use. And I want you to notice something. Paragraph tells the reader exactly who, why, and when you stopped recruiting participants. If you have anything that you want to add, you can add to this paragraph. And if there's anything that you want to omit that you did not do, you can omit it. It's going to depend on your supervisor. So at the end of the day, you want to follow and do what your supervisor or your reviewer wants you to do, so long as it is right. Now, I want to add something. Before you choose a sampling technique for your research, there's one concept that you need to understand, which is what we call quota sampling. And if you are really interested in knowing what this quota sampling is, when you should use it, and how it works, and how to even determine the quota, I highly recommend that you watch this video right here. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye.